Okay, so thanks everyone for coming on a bit of a wild September day. I'm Andrew Clark, I'm Principal Ecologist at Merseyside ES and I'm leading on nature recovery. The talk tonight is associated with Sefton Coast conservation strategy and we've been given some money from Natural England, so you can see a series of logos on the bottom, and basically those are the main people and partnerships that are involved. So we've been given some funding from Natural England to be able to update the nature conservation strategy, and that money is basically come about because of the Environment Act 2021. So that Environment Act brought in a new strategy called Protected Site Strategies, alongside other things like biodiversity net gain, which you might have heard of. So the funding has come off the back of that, and I think the idea is in the longer term, our nature conservation strategy may become a protected site strategy. But in effect, they're one and the same thing. So sorry to be throwing different terms, but that's basically why we've got the money to be here tonight. It's also funded by Sefton Council, and it's the nature conservation strategy is one of the key priorities of the Sefton Coast Landscape Partnership, who are a group of individuals and groups who work on the coast. So that includes the local authority, it includes Merseyside ES, the Mersey Forest, Natural England, some of the golf courses, Ministry of Defence, and other individuals and groups.
National Trust.
National Trust, thank you, John.
RSPB.
RSPB, yeah. So, really briefly, the Sefton Coast, we've got about 20 miles from Crosby all the way up to Southport of continuous sand dune. We also have 3 estuaries, so in the south at Seaforth we have the mouth of the Mersey, and just south of Formby at Hightown we've obviously got Alt Mouth and the Alt Estuary, and then at the northern end we've got the Ribble. The Sefton Coast is recognised for its international importance in terms of biodiversity, so species and habitats, and because of that it's got multiple layers of legislation, through different legislation, so things like sites of scientific interest that John mentioned, also other things like the special area conservation, and that really kind of sets really the tone of what we can and can't do in terms of managing the coast. So that has a bearing really on what the strategy can do. As I say, it's the largest continuous sand dune system in England, and it's a stronghold for protected and priority species. So things like, you'll all be aware of things like natterjack toad, sand lizard, all the various birds that kind of use the estuaries over the winter and also kind of in the spring and autumn passage that we're in now. There's also a wide and unique botanical interest on the coast. So I think, botanically, I think Ainsdale in particular is one of, and Crosby, I think are amongst the sort of the most botanically rich parts of the northwest of England. But amongst all that nature conservation interest, we're also a coast of multiple landowners and managers, and I think one of the reasons the partnership was formed really was to bring those land managers together to try and act, in a coordinated way, I suppose, to try and improve the condition of the coast. But that's really challenging because each of those landowners have got their own interests. Some of them, we've got the golf courses, we've got port and industry in the south, and then we've also got kind of other tourism events, so things like the air show and the British Musical Fireworks and events that happen every year, which can be challenging, but are also really popular with people. So it's about getting the management right, I think, of those activities. So just briefly, the condition of the triple SI, just under 25% is actually in favourable status currently. So this is really the key aim of what the nature conservation strategy is trying to do: improve the the nature conservation status to a more favourable condition across the whole site. So currently, the intertidal areas are more favourable. John might say otherwise, but that's how it's come out through Natural England do this assessment. But you can see actually, most of the dune areas are in some level of unfavourable condition, which is, is a real challenge.
Do you mean unfavourable for wildlife?
Yes.
Unfavourable for wildlife.
Yeah. In terms of habitat and stuff.
Something called Common Standards Measuring. So it's a Natural England metric. So they have a series of criteria based on what the designated site. So the SSSI is designated for the birds, the dunes. It's designated for things like grayling, invertebrates. It's also designated for sand lizard and one or two other things. So basically, somebody goes out and does a survey in each of those units, assesses it against various criteria, which gives basically a kind of an indication of what the overall status is of each unit and collectively of the whole site. So there's more information that can be shared on. So as I mentioned before, there is the nature conservation strategy does exist, but it's the money that we've got from Natural England to help us update and refresh it. So we've had all these changes with legislation. We've got new threats. Some of the things on the slide have become worse, but until recently we haven't really had the resource to be able to update the strategy and give us a plan, for us all to work to. So we looked at this, the Sefton Coast Landscape Partnership, and did an exercise just talking about, well, in addition to what was in the previous plan, what else do we think has changed? What strategies locally are important that we need to think about? We need to recognise the legislation, yes, and we talked about that quite a bit today, but we also need to think about the baseline, and make sure that that's as strong as possible. And that will help us then target where we can use the resource we have to the areas of greatest need. So I'm not going to dwell too much on that because I want to get to John.
Oh dear.
But yeah, there's a lot of challenges and they're generally getting worse. So that's one of the reasons we've been given the money, because Sefton Coast is quite complex and there are a number of issues that we face. This is talk 4 of the series that we've ran over the last 4 weeks. So we were in Southport talking about climate change. We did one in Ainsdale on invasive species a couple of weeks ago. Last week we were here with John talking about birds and insects, which some of you attended. And tonight obviously is about community involvement, engagement and management. We have now got all the slides on the website up until tonight. The plan is to put the recordings on, but we haven't done that yet. These talks are part of a number of activities that we're doing. So we have a survey which went live on Monday, which I'll briefly show you, and we're hoping to do some other focused events and workshops with young people and other stakeholders later in the autumn. And the idea is all of this engagement will feed into an updated plan, which we're hoping to publish next year. So
this evening, I'm looking at community involvement, engagement and management on the coast, and that's in the context of the nature conservation strategy within the SSSI. So I see 1 or 2 volunteers for people who work in our parks as well, which is absolutely marvellous. But it's not volunteering in parks we're looking at this evening, it's that volunteering on the coast that feeds into the designations of the SSSI and the requirements. So I should say, for those of you who don't know me, sorry, my name's John Dempsey, I'm the Engagement Officer for Green Sefton. I've worked on the coast for 15 years now. Before that, surveyed it and recorded it probably for another 40. So it's kind of my home more than anything. I feel very privileged to be able to be on it every day. Every day is different, and we're very lucky to have it, I think. Volunteer hours, I'm just going to jump straight in and go through what we're doing on the coast. Again, I stress this is volunteer hours purely for the coast. We're very lucky. We have a great volunteering community within Green Sefton. In total, taking in parks for 2023, and we've still got a few more hours to come in yet from some of our groups. We're currently logging about 37,000 hours plus a year from our volunteers. That's about 3,000 or 4,000 down than we were before COVID and the lockdowns, but that seems to be the case in a lot of parts of the country where sometimes sadly people didn't come back to volunteering and some groups are rebuilding. So yeah, to be down just a couple of thousand hours is quite good. Purely on the coast though, over 2,800 hours of volunteer work carried out on the Sefton Coast in 2023. People working alongside Green Sefton Coast staff and our stewardship initiatives that we'll look at this evening. That doesn't include volunteers who work for National Trust or Natural England or the RSPB. These are separate bodies, although they're part of the partnership. So I would guess, and again I'm probably taking a wild guess, but I guess you could probably put another 2,000 hours on top of that again for those specific organisations. Activities range from beach cleans and litter picks in the dunes, which of course very regular things, very, very important on this coastline, with regular community groups running at Crosby, Hightown, Ainsdale, Southport and the Formby groups through the National Trust. For those of you who've ever done a beach clean will know, no matter how many times you do it, sadly the state of the world's oceans means there will always be more litter for us to collect and more issues to address. What we're starting to see on this coastline now, where arguably water pollution has improved or water quality has improved in the last few decades, is that equally the amount of microplastics is increasing as well. And it's lovely to see without which embarrass people like Tom in the audience and Kathy. We do a lot of work on this picking microplastics out of the sand. Once they start entering the food chain, you know, it's not just a question of what it does for wildlife, which is bad. Ultimately, it's ourselves as well. It's going to start affecting in a detrimental way. So litter picking, beach cleaning is a very, very important part of the volunteer role and management of the coast. Scrub removal in the dune system is also key. We can't do that throughout the year because we don't want to disturb species. We tend to restrict that work to winter. And because of our changing climate, that means the window when we can actually do this work is getting smaller and smaller every winter as well. So that's having an impact. When I started working on the coast, it's quite normal for people to be out chainsawing now in September and be burning now and burning right through to the end of April. Now, and it's what, 15 years, really we'll only start cutting at the end of October, which is to be absolutely safe because of the way some of the species are behaving, and we finish at the end of February. And that's because a lot of breeding birds, migrant birds that in years past, you know, wouldn't rock up until the end of April, beginning of May, start singing, and now turning up at the end of February, beginning of March. So that's curtailing what we can do. There's not a lot we can do about that. We also have survey work, of course, as Andrew said. You know, you look at the species on the coast, and it's okay for us to work towards this triple SI, but without the work of volunteers actually logging the populations and how they're doing, the work is not going to be based in fact and science. It's vitally important for the nature conservation strategy that it's based in solid science, just as it is anywhere else in the world. If you're going to manage an ecosystem, it's not about, to use grey squirrels as an example, it's not about everybody loving animals. Sometimes you have to be quite brutal about things. And for example, grey squirrels is a perfect case in point. Poor old greys done nothing wrong. It's just been introduced by some misguided individual in the 19th century into this country. Bottom line is it's not controlled. We're going to lose red squirrels, the native species in this country. And there's a discussion about that, you know, about how that works on another level, but it's an interesting thought. But the point I'm trying to get across is it's not about looking after everything. The conservation strategy should be reflecting the sites that are protected and the reasons why they're protected. So key species are monitored: natterjack toad, sand lizard, some of the bird populations are counted as well, we'll come to that. And also cattle lookery. We'll see why that's an important volunteer role in a few minutes as we go on. So let's have a few, talk to a few images as well, just looking over the year. These are some of our ambassadors on the beach at Ainsdale on a lovely day. Sometimes working as a volunteer isn't that hard. It's quite a nice job in the sun. Not always like that. But these ambassadors work for our Give Birds a Break campaign. And their role in summer, you can see how busy Ainsdale Beach is on a day like that, is to explain to people coming onto the coast, we do it at Crosby as well, why they should keep their pets under control, why they shouldn't be allowed to chase birds, the effect of chasing birds, the fact that it's actually a criminal offence under the Wildlife and Countryside Act, and just the importance of sort of respecting that habitat. It's key work, to be honest, and a lot of these volunteers now will work throughout the winter and will coordinate that with specifically high tides, because of course when you get a storm system like we're experiencing at the moment, quite a small one, but still a storm system, A lot of birds are going to be tired out on that coast because they've been fighting the gales. If you walk on the beach in wind like this, you get tired than if you do on a sunny day. Same for them, they start to die after a few days in these conditions, so it's important that people understand that and give them a break. It's not just dog walkers, it's horse riders. They'll speak to, sometimes it can be bird watchers and photographers that cause problems for a lot of this wildlife too. It's all about engaging with them, talking with them and getting them to enjoy their visit to the coast in a way that doesn't harm the habitat. Not always easy, but it's important work. We mentioned some of the work, the surveying work, and also some of the actual hands-on land management work we'll look at as well. This is a very hardy team of volunteers who agreed to dig out one of the slacks this winter just past. They were a great group. They came from an ecological company, to be fair, and they had a whale at the time. It didn't stop raining from when they arrived at 8 o'clock in the morning till when they left at 4 in the afternoon. 2 of them fell in 3 or 4 times, were absolutely drenched and still didn't stop raining, so I really like them. But their work was vital. Again, it's winter work, so you can see what they're doing. They're taking a lot of the vegetation that grows in our pools and the dunes in the summer out, so it's more attractive to the toads when the toads emerge in the spring, the natterjacks, and hopefully they start to breed. A lot of these pools, like this one, if you visit it today, are full of summer vegetation. But that's okay, because that's what the slacks, the dunes, are meant to do in summer. These damp areas are meant, the flora is meant to flourish. And then come spring, hopefully there's less flora that we've removed or it's died back in winter and the water is clear and warm enough to attract the natterjacks. But it takes that work to do it. So sometimes it's small dedicated groups like that. Other times it's really, really big groups like this. We get a lot of commercial corporate volunteering on the coast now, which is highly valued. As many of you will know, most companies now subscribe to 2 volunteering days a year. So beach cleaning, as you can imagine, is something that people want to do all the time, and we welcome that. We ask people to contact us before they do, so we can make sure they're doing it at the right time, which is at a low tide or a falling tide. But quite often, if there's a lot of applications in, and regular beach cleaning group members that we have here will know that it's not unusual at certain times of the year to have 7 or 8 groups wanting to go onto the same site in a week. Well, that's great, but really we're trying now where possible to encourage them to do other work away from beach cleaning. Beach cleaning is important, but if you have that many people and the beach was picked clean the day before, wouldn't it be nice to get them tackling some of the invasive species? We're trying to turn people into looking at that type of work. So sometimes it is just a great big group like that. Other times it's small community groups, like Shots here, that we meet once a month. I know our Crosby group meets once a month, Hightown, and Ainsdale, and Southport, and the Formby groups meet as well. You don't need me to tell you as regular visitors to the coast that because we have this huge tidal range, and because of the nature of Liverpool Bay, that cyclical tidal action, unfortunately, the world's plastics are always going to come to our door. It is, if you've never done it, I recommend you come and give it a try sometime. It's one of the most therapeutic things you can do. It's very engrossing, and sometimes as well with our climate changing, you come across quite remarkable discoveries. In recent years, I found a Portuguese man of war on the beach, which was quite something. Some people might not be too keen, but I thought that was a remarkable find. And occasionally we can even find sea beans from South America, which are these seed pods from wonderful tropical plants in the jungle that have fallen into the water, are salt resistant and are naturally buoyant and can travel on the Gulf Stream across the Atlantic. They're kind of a once in a lifetime find, but when you do find one, it's quite an experience. So I was lucky, I found one at just north of Freshfield about 5 or 6 years ago, which I gave to the museum. Remarkable thing. Just the idea that our context, if you like, in the global context was reinforced by it. And we don't just litter pick in summer because we can't cut. We're also starting to look at some of the work on our invasives. This group, and some of it is, we're still trying to work out what's best. Some of us, this group here, are pulling up a plant called everlasting pea. Anybody who's familiar with the dunes will have seen it. It's a beautiful thing that looks like a sweet pea, because it is a sweet pea. It's hugely invasive. It's a native plant, but it's found its way to the Sefton Coast in the late 70s. There was one clump of it up at Marshside by the sandwooding plant, and there was another clump down at Burbo Bank, just north of the beach entrance there. Since then, it's gone on to cover huge areas of the coast. Now, the problem with everlasting pea is it's not like the buckthorn that we'll come to in a minute that we can cut and treat and dig out. It's an annual, so it seeds and scatters its seed everywhere. It's not the type of thing we could apply herbicide to like we have with Rosa rugosa. It's something that we literally have to lift out. In Holland, they've worked out if you pull it out at the right time in summer, it reduces regrowth by about 80%, which is really encouraging. The problem is the Dutch study is based on an area about the size of a tennis court, whereas we're working on a coast that's about 20 miles long. So we're trying to work out the best and most effective ways of pulling out an area. This is an area at Hightown, at Ainsdale, north of Shore Road, that we've been working on for the last 2 summers, where we've literally been targeting it, photographing it once a month with groups and pulling it out. I have to say, there's not much of a change each year when it comes back, which is a concern. So I suspect something like everlasting P is going to become a major problem in the future, in the way that things like Traveller's Joy, wild clematis has, and obviously obvious invasives like rosa and sea buckthorn. This is the nature of a coastline, that this is attractive to wild plants. They're not always going to be ones that you want. So we look at a few examples here of some of the work that's carried out along the coast by our volunteers. First off, Hightown Beach Clean Group. There's a wave, Kath and Tom. They've carried out scrub control work at Hightown. This is just for 2023, assisting our core team with scrub and buckthorn removal and helping to rejuvenate breeding slacks for natterjack toads. The group carry out numerous beach cleans throughout the year. And for this winter, we were just talking about it then, we've identified an area of slack that we're going to clear of willow and sea buckthorn this winter. We're going to try and get the Hightown Parish Council to involve themselves with that as well, so we can get a lot of people on the ground. If ever you speak to Tom about the great work they do at Hightown, he'll tell you the importance of getting as many people onto these sites as possible. Many hands make light work when it comes to clearing. We then apply pesticide to sites and hopefully, herbicide, I beg your pardon, and hopefully it slows the regrowth of things like buckthorn. But the truth is, buckthorn is going to be a problem I think we're going to have to endure for quite a long time. And there's Tom and Kath and a few able volunteers with some buckthorn. I think that was about 2 or 3 years ago, that shot. I quite like it. It was a good day, that. Really? Great, that makes me feel really old. Thanks, Tom. Wonderful. But it shows you what a small group can do, you know, cutting it back, and then the stumps are treated, so hopefully it slows the regrowth of the plant. A lot of people like buckthorn, you know, because it's a great source of vitamin C. People make bread out of it. People, you know, have brewed with it. You know, I was guilty as a child of trying to distill alcohol from sea buckthorn berries, and it ended very badly because it blew up in the kitchen we were in and covered it in orange berries, and as children we were in the doghouse for quite a long time for attempting that. But it is popular now. Sometimes when people say, well, can we just pick the berries, that's quite an interesting example of how maybe the strategy needs to look at community and how people react to our sites, because we don't encourage foraging on the coast because there's a number of berries that are obviously poisonous. You know, it's a natural place. But at the same time, the idea that foraging is okay inevitably leads to people picking things that they don't know shouldn't be picked. And sometimes it can be quite startling. There was a remarkable example last year of a doctor who actually picked what he thought was parsley, and it turned out to be hemlock water dropwood, which isn't the best thing you can use, put it that way. But the fact that, you know, he thought that would be okay kind of sums it up. And we don't like foraging either, because occasionally rare plants can be damaged when people pick. It's the old thing, you know, if you've got a lovely band of blackberries there and you take a few for yourself, it's lovely. But then if everybody finds out and they take every blackberry off it, or marsh sandfire from various parts of the coast, it starts having a profound effect. So we have to be quite prescriptive. So that's Tom, and here's the rest of his crew on another day. It wasn't just that day, it got quite cold that day. I think that was quite a nippy one, that. But yeah, the group meets on a very regular basis, beach cleans and scrub clearance as well, so it's very much appreciated. Hightown is one of those areas that a lot of it isn't triple SI, but I think the important thing is that the work that Tom and Kath and the group do with Green Sefton is making it more and more important to have a management plan for that site, because the key thing with all of this is that there's a commonality approach through this strategy. Obviously, if you want the species like the toads and the lizards to thrive, they should be able to move up and down the coast rather than face blockers of different management. So the key is removing scrub and having lots of nice open sand and fewer invasives. We also have buckthorn bashers. These guys meet at the moment each winter every Thursday at Ainsdale, and they have cutting events throughout the winter. They always welcome volunteers, so it's all, if you want to come down, you're more than welcome. They clear sea buckthorn from one particular area, which is about 800 metres north of Shore Road. And they've been doing that now for 5 or 6 years, and probably, hopefully, will long continue to do it. So they cut it, they remove willow scrub as well. The brash is stacked for burning, and then our team and our wonderful natural alternatives team, who are clients with additional needs, come in and burn it. So there's a few of the Buckthorn Bashers on a Thursday. Sadly, we've lost one or two of them this year, including the wonderful Trevor Davenport in the centre there, who is probably one of the best photographers I've ever come across on the coast, certainly, and a great naturalist. But it's a lovely range of people. If ever you want to sort of get involved in a group that's cutting and working, this is the great example, as is Hightown. So we have lots of groups like this you can get involved in. People from all walks of life come down and join, from students to retirees, from professionals in terms of nature conservation, to people who just want to come out for a bit of fresh air. And it's just lovely to see. It's great. I always assume people know what public enemy number 1 is, but for those who don't know, that's sea buckthorn. Native plant in Britain, but introduced here in 1900 to stop sand blow, which is the one thing that you don't want on a healthy dune system. You want the sand to move. So consequently, when that arrived, it caused a lot of problems. And climate change as well has, of course, with vegetation growth. So once they've cut it, they stack it in these big piles like this, and then myself and colleagues come down on hopefully nice calm days when the wind's in the right direction and burn it. It's not so bad at Dainsdale because housing, and Southwark, because housing is a reasonable distance. It's difficult, and Tom will tell you, at Hightown, because of course it's a very narrow coastal strip, so it's hard for us to burn this stuff on site unless you've got an easterly wind. So quite often, poor Tom will get a frantic call from myself in the middle of winter saying it's easterly for 2 or 3 days, let's get burning, and that'll change again and we can't burn. That day was in Ainsdale. That was actually one of those it's quite a nice day to have a burn because it was so cold. I think it was 2 or 3 winters ago, -7. We have other ways of clearing scrub and woodland as well that help the community. The Sefton Woodland Allotment Association is something that we hope to develop. It takes a bit of work, so there's just the one association. In 2023 they had 31 cutting events at 7 different sites in the borough, and they removed an estimated 2 hectares of scrub, putting in 352 volunteer hours in the year. And the key with the Allotment Association is it's reciprocal. We go out, we identify, if you like, sapling trees, broadly speaking trees that are no wider than a baked bean tin, that are suitable for the volunteers to cut with hand tools. We mark them up, the Allotment Association goes in, they take them down, they chop them up, and they're allowed to take the wood home to burn for themselves in the gardens or on their stoves. Obviously they have to dry it before they put it on the stove. It's working very well. The association its membership is fully subscribed at the moment. So at present we're involved in conversations to sort of perhaps create another group of Woodland Allotment Association somewhere else in the borough. It's just making sure you've got the right people to manage something like that, because it is, like a lot of successful volunteer groups, something that works quite independently but also reports to us, so we know exactly where they are. We say where they're going to go, we agree the dates, and we agree the trees for them to remove. But it seems to work quite well. There's some of the woodland allotment guys, you can see there some of the birch they've got. Should keep them going for a few weeks on a fire or on a chimney or in a back garden, should work quite well. So it's not like they're taking tons off. It's scrub that we would cut and probably either burn on site or even leave as certain wood habitats on some sites as well. We don't do that too much on the dunes because ultimately it doesn't benefit and it rots down and enriches the sand. And there is another one of them in Jutta view over, I think that's over Ainsdale looking in. That was one of the first areas that they cleared the scrub at that had covered, and you can get an idea of the size of the trees that the team are taking. They're not lumberjacks, you can take them down with little hand saws and they can chop them up into this manageable lengths. Surveying is important too. We have trained volunteers carrying out regular monitoring of key species at appropriate times of the year. Obviously the natterjack toad, the sand lizard is important, migrant birds are very important to log as well. There's an incredible, if ever you want to get involved in that, there's a wonderful survey that's been running for 37 years now, all around the coastline of Britain, called the Wetland and Estuary Bird Survey. And these guys aren't professional, they know what they're doing, the ladies and gentlemen who do it, but at a prescribed date every month, they're given a site, a bit like a unit if you will, and they count the birds on it along the coast. So we have Webb's counters on this coast for Crosby, up as far as Burbo Bank and just beyond. Then we have a Webb's counter for the Old Estuary. We have a Webb's counter for the Rifle Range up to Albert Road. There's one that does the stretch from Formby up to Freshfield, and one that does Ainsdale to Birkdale and so on, one that goes up through the Ribble Estuary too. And what that does is it gives us data. It gives us sound scientific data. It's okay for someone like me to say, oh, there wasn't a lot of birds around today. That doesn't really mean a lot. That could be for any number of reasons. It could be down to the weather, it could be down to an isolated example of disturbance, but this work gives sound empirical data. And much the same with the study of our natterjack toads. We have at least one of our counters in here now who are given pools that they check throughout the season and record the activity. Quite often in bad years it's zero activity, but knowing that is very important too, because we know there's an issue. Sorry, yes, question. Yes. We don't survey them, but it's funny, we were talking about it last week. The roe deer population is really increasing in the borough, has been for about the last 7 or 8 years. That's completely normal as a species, as an adaptive species. They've been expanding all over Britain steadily for the last 50 years. It's just taken them a bit of time to get into our area. So they're here to stay now. Without sort of repeating myself too much from last week, at the moment they're great, they're welcome because they're a natural grazer. We lost our natural grazer, although rabbits were introduced by the Romans. We lost that when myxomatosis kicked in and leveled the rabbit population. We still have lots of rabbits, but compared to what we had in the 50s and 60s, it's just a fraction, and it's one of the reasons why vegetation growth goes so quick on the coast, because there aren't that many rabbits. Myxomatosis is one of these terribly cold works of genius. You know, it's a cold genius that never goes away. It stays in the population. So if the rabbit population starts climbing and they're in burrows, they're breathing more, so the temperature increases in the burrows, that triggers the virus and kills the rabbits. That never stops. So that means whenever the population starts to get back on its feet, if you will, it gets hit by it again. So that's a problem for us as the grazer. So having the roe deer here now is wonderful, because they're a native grazer. I guess, and it is just a guess, I don't have any survey data, so don't hold it. I think there's probably about 300 in the borough at the moment, maybe a few more, and that population will grow and grow and grow. We see them, you see them in urban areas, you see them in the middle of Bootle quite often, you see them on Crosby Coastal Park, obviously in the dunes. There comes a point, probably, who knows how quick, hopefully a few decades down the road, where we get too many of them, and one of the favourite things that roe deer like to eat is wildflowers. So if you've got a triple SI that Andrew was talking about, one of which is designations of these incredible varieties of wildflowers and congregations, that potentially could be an issue in the future. But at the moment, we're pleased they're here. And it does mean there are more ticks on the coast. I know dog walkers sometimes are concerned, and we were talking last week, people pick up ticks more often than they do now. I think probably worse things happen in return of having something as lovely as a deer walking over the place and doing a bit of grazing for us. I don't mind. I took 2 or 3 ticks off me last week from various sites, but as long as you're careful, it's fine. So yeah, we look at the migrant birds. Roe deer we don't monitor, but we might well start if they become a problem. And as I say, this work provides invaluable data on the health of populations of our protected species. Some of the work we're going to look at that we do now, it's all well and good doing it, but the important thing about a lot of the rare species here is if they go, they're not going to come back naturally. You have to think of our coastline almost as an island habitat. So it's isolated. If you're a natterjack toad, and heaven forbid we lost our natterjack toad population, natterjack toads are not naturally going to come in here. They're not like the red squirrel. There were no red squirrels here until the late 19th century, arguably early 20th, because there was no woodland. We only planted pine trees on this coast in the middle of the 19th century as a catch crop. Squirrels found it to their liking and moved in. There were red squirrels in parts of Liverpool, Fazakerley and places like that, who gradually moved into the area. But that shows you a species like that could recover and move in. But things like the toads and the sandwiches can't do that. So it's important that the habitat is right for them. And again, another few images of this type of work. There's some people actually counting the wading birds. It's quite a big group that on the coast today, instead of just monitoring those numbers and logging them and comparing them. We used to do more survey work like this over the years. That's declined because some of the populations, things like the tern populations, and people at Hightown will be familiar with terns resting on the coast, and to a lesser extent at Crosby and at Thornbury, of course. But the numbers of those are dropping. So the value then was the sheer number of terns that were coming here and the ringing recoveries we were getting from them. And we used the terns to log disturbance. When the flocks was 6,500 strong birds, we'd have volunteers who would count them every day over set high tides. And just to put the problem of disturbance into context, then you can do a lot of things with statistics, I know, but all the disturbance that was recorded by them I put them into a time sequence, and it translated that roughly every 13 and a half minutes on that stretch of the Sefton Coast, all the birds would be disturbed, sent up into the air by either dogs, bird watchers, horses. So of course that's quite a profound problem. And the terns are one of the more resilient ones. The waders, if that happens, they start to die. At least the terns can fly out to sea. So surveying is very important. And we just look at some of the stars they survey for. There's a beautiful natterjack toad, at his very best, a nice male, singing his bubblegum throat out in the dead of night. All these pictures, pictures of toads, they're so rare. I have to stress they're taken under license. You can't just pop down and take a picture. We do guard them quite zealously. But I'm pleased to say this year seems to have been a good year for them, potentially the best in 7 years. It's early days yet, because although it's toadlets that are out and are now sort of feeding in certain areas, a lot can go wrong between them becoming little toadlets and maturity, which is about 3 years, something like that, before they reach maturity. But fingers crossed this year wasn't so bad for the little fellas, because they did need help. Sand lizards too are also monitored. These are absolutely wonderful creatures. And the truth is, because of the difficulty in monitoring sand lizards, if people are honest, I don't think we know exactly how many sand lizards are on the coast. I don't think it's many. I think it's probably no more than 200 animals. That again is kind of just a feeling and a guess. It's always hard to get a figure, because if a lot of our volunteers are obviously real fans of sand lizards, and they want to see sand lizards when they survey. So if you have someone out volunteering to survey sand lizards, they're going to want to go to a place where they know there's sand lizards. Quite often what we want is volunteers to go to places where we don't see sand lizards. If you love sand lizards, you might want to do that very much. But hopefully, we get a good cover for them. And yeah, there are key pockets for them and key areas. Effectively now, it's not sort of breaking any, what's the word, any sort of, any protection or anything. With sand lizards occur really from Hightown up as far as Birkdale, just in that one area in varying numbers on the frontal dunes. We're not allowed to say exactly where, because the poor things are so rare. There used to be all manner of problems for them, but they seem to be left alone by people now. They're very good at hiding. Quite often the busiest beach entrance will have sand lizards there under the marram looking at people, and people are completely unaware that they're there. You have to sort of move quite quietly to see spectacular males like this, which are quite beautiful animals. So that's some of the volunteering work we do. The lookering I mentioned ties in with conservation grazing. This is a really important part of the role. Conservation grazing is something we've been doing now for about 20 years on the Sefton Coast. We graze cattle and sheep that are brought onto the dunes in winter. The reason we could arguably do it in summer as well, but and it might be something that develops over the years. But of course, there are kind of issues arguably with disturbing ground nesting birds. I don't think it would be that much of a problem. I think maybe we should look in the future at doing more grazing, because it is very effective. We get our cattle from the Lancs Wildlife Trust, and our sheep via Natural England from Lakeland herds around Wasdale Head. These are herdwicks, which are hard as nails. People often worry about bad, harsh weather conditions for the sheep here in winter when we get very bad winters. I remember going out to Canton in 2013, that winter when we last had big snow. And I think it was about -14, and I went out there. It was over Christmas. When you do something, and as you're doing it, you realise it's not the smartest of ideas. I was wandering out, and of course, there was so much snow, I was disappearing into drifts chest deep in this -14. No one else in the word, so I shouldn't have done. But I was worried about the sheep, and I wanted to make sure they were okay. Anyway, I got to the pen, and there they all were, absolutely fine. They were warmer than me, wandering around. It was like a summer's day on Wasdale Head for them. -14, no bother. They could hack it. So they're really important, and they're a vital part of dune management to keep down vegetation and open up areas of sand. We have volunteers who do daily welfare checks on sites at Ainsdale, Birkdale and Formby, because of course the animals need to be looked after. We need to make sure they're healthy, that they're eating well, and also that they're not suffering from disturbance. I'm sorry to say, over the years we have lost sheep to dog attacks, and potentially even one of the cattle a year or two ago. I won't say it was a dog attack, because there was no empirical proof that there was, but the suggestion was the thing had been nipped by a dog. And cows are actually quite surprising. They're very easily stressed for something that big. You'd think they're fine, but sometimes all it takes is for a dog that's not under control to run after them, and the cows will run, and one day later will have some type of cardiac episode and fall over dead. So in the same way as other landowners are very prescriptive about where dogs are meant to go around livestock, we're the same too. fingers crossed, you know, we've not had too many incidents. We did have a bad incident with a dog on the Natural England site maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, and that got to the extent where, you know, there were people prepared to catch and euthanize the dog. The amount of killing was so great. It was coming out at night. It was strange. The owner probably didn't even know what it was doing. It probably was in a pen somewhere and it worked out how to get out. It was slipping out at night, killing 3 or 4 sheep and then going back home and you'd see the next morning when it woke up. But of course for us, that's a major problem. And for the herd owner, it's a major problem too. But they are wonderful animals and they do great work. At the moment in winter, and hopefully we'll get them back in a few weeks, we have these. These are English Longhorns. They're an endangered breed. They're huge. They're absolutely great animals. And Longhorns are probably the favoured one in terms of conservation grazing in Britain at the moment because they're so big and they really they open up the sand as they move around and they create these patches and they'll smash up things like buckthorn that you can eat there. So they're a wonderful animal. The guy in the front there is Big George. He's our biggest Longhorn, and Big George comes from Kirkham Prison. I don't know what he was doing in Kirkham Prison, but you know, he's so big, whatever he did there is his own business, and he can stay. But the point about our Longhorns is they do a good job. People didn't want to use them on the coast for quite a long time because Longhorns are quite an aggressive cow, naturally. But this herd has been bred over a number of years by the wildlife trusts, so it's actually quite docile. And you can do that obviously with livestock. You can breed certain traits and characteristics into them. So I'm pleased to say Big George, big as he is soft as anything. Sometimes we get other ones that people I know are very popular with our visitors, like the belted Galloways, which are quite beautiful, lovely little, again, once an endangered breed. The Belties, because they're quite small, didn't have the same effect as the Longhorns, I have to be honest. They're lovely and it's great to see them on the site, but Longhorns have more of an effect, just breaking up the sand and eating that rank vegetation. And of course we have the lovely Herdwicks as well that have their own little pen, and they're more a nibbler. So while the cows break up land and open it and trample it and knock down saplings and eat, the sheep really are just nibblers, keeping the grass and the sward short. In addition to that, the volunteer work that works alongside our core team and countryside stewardship works that Andrew touched on. So countryside stewardship funding is something we were able to achieve from the Heritage Lottery Fund. It's a funding pot drawn down through DEFRA, so it's not council money. They were able to finance this work on the coast with the help of Natural England. And this involves clearing large areas of dune system with invasive scrub using heavy machinery. Last winter we cleared 7 large slacks at Ainsdale, which are rejuvenated completely. We had 98 days on site with the diggers. They created corridors to the rear dunes, improving habitat. And work will continue this year, as I touched on when we were talking about the various units. That work will continue at Birkdale Dunes and Queen's Jubilee Nature Trail this winter as well. And we also have legacy work. This is legacy work following a dynamic dunescapes project of spraying the invasive Rosa rugosa plant, which I'm sure some of you who went to Phil Smith's talk a week or 2 ago will have learnt about. The reason why I flag these, and these are important, is this is the context in which our volunteers work on the coast. So it's a unified approach, if you will. Volunteers, the work that they do sits very nicely with this work alongside of it. So the core team, which again is the Green Sefton team, I'm sure there were other stats for Natural England and the National Trust as well. Last winter, we carried out 158 man-days of felling and scrub control work at 9 different sites on the coast. Because it's felling, so that was from Hightown, basically as far north as Birkdale. That's where we were working. So 982 health and safety and risk assessment checks were carried out in that time. People sometimes forget, although because there are so many people living around this wonderful habitat, parts of it are still quite remote, and it's surprising how many times people get lost on our coast still, or even get into difficulties. Still a place that needs to be treated with respect, especially in winter when there are fewer people around. 3,368 site visits last winter, and 644 fence line checks carried out. Now those fence line checks are mainly for areas where we have our cattle and livestock, because it might sound surprising, but we still have people who don't like the idea that there's cattle on the coast and will cut fences. I can't be saying anything too constructive about that, but it's a particularly selfish thing to do. Presumably they assume we're going to stop grazing and their access won't be impeded, but anybody can go through the cattle enclosures. There are numerous gates on all of them. All we ask is if you have a dog, keep it under close control or on a lead if possible, just as you would if you were walking across a farmer's field, and it's not a lot to ask. So we have to check those constantly. 1,100 interactions with the public while that work were recorded. We had 328 controlled burns, so this is the scrub that we saw being burned at various sites. What we're trying to do is reduce the number of controlled burn sites we have for obvious reasons. Burning stuff isn't best in the climate we're living in now, and there are a number of other options that appear to be on the table. It's a question of getting funding now. There's some quite interesting things like portable burners, which work on the principle of an air fryer, simply put. And they're very, very expensive, and they're a bit small for us now, but hopefully in years to come that might be a way in which we burn scrub.
Does National Trust got one?
They have, I think it was Natural England we're going to get one, Natalie, but I've not seen the thing in use yet. Obviously it'd be preferable to releasing all this smoke into the atmosphere, but at the moment that's the only way we can do it. And this work has allowed us to clear 11 hectares of non-native and invasive scrub on the coast, which is great. So a few images of what this work looks like, because it isn't about, it can be quite striking. People are sometimes shocked when they see this work going on. This isn't about sort of just cutting out the odd bush. This is large-scale landscape management. And this landscape will soften because it's a dune system, so it looks harsh at the moment, but the species that use these areas will benefit from it in the long term, and this is what we have to do. We use contractors for this work because obviously it's very, very skilled. You're using 40-ton diggers, and they're lovely. The contractors we use over the years, when they come each winter, they're very, very careful, to the extent that you'll get phone calls about there's a holly bush here. Do you want that to stay? You're clearing 10 hectares of land. Just clear it. Don't worry about it. And once they've been there for a few weeks and months, they realise the scale of the work, and they really sort of have an effect. So this type of stuff is very, very, very important for us, and you can see the effect there. This is a slack at Ainsdale. This is slack 169, which up until last winter was effectively covered, absolutely covered in sea buckthorn and bulrush. We couldn't see the water in it at all. And I'm pleased to say this summer just gone full of natterjack toads, because this work was last winter. And it'll be productive, I think, hopefully for 5 or 6 years. Some of it will come back, inevitably. That's the nature of invasive species. But hopefully while the work continues, it keeps it in check. We mentioned some of the work our core team does as well. We will chainsaw stuff down. That's some of the team taking out silver birch in an area and just clearing that area of scrub. You can see a cleared area behind where the guys are working and the stuff being dropped. Sometimes they'll work in tandem with volunteer groups like NMOG, North Merseyside Amphibian and Reptile Group, who, as they're working, will then clear patches, sand patch, if you like, that Tom and I were talking about, that makes it more attractive to lizards. But again, it's targeted work. So this particular area, with all these big trees, was once a great sand lizard site. So in terms of priority, and we were talking about the unit's favourable conditions and otherwise, obviously improving that unit for sand lizards makes it more favourable. So that's why we go at that one. And if you're wandering around, quite often you'll see our signs, tree cutting. You'll obviously hear us long before you see us if we're chainsawing. But yeah, hopefully you'll see them over the winter. And if the guys are there, by all means stop and have a chat. They're always happy to speak to people, but just make sure they can see you before you let them come to you rather than walking up behind them. Because if it's someone in a digger or a chainsaw or a 40-tonner, you need to be a bit careful. So that concludes the talk. I hope you found it interesting.